A ceramic coffee mug exploded across the diner floor at 11:47 p.m., and for 3 full seconds, nobody in the Rusty Fork moved. Not the short order cook, not the 2 truckers at the counter, not the teenage waitress holding a coffee pot in both hands like she'd forgotten what hands were for. Then Officer Dale Pruitt laughed. He had Olivia Bennett by the arm, her left arm, the one with the old shrapnel scar running from elbow to wrist that she never talked about, and he was squeezing hard enough that his knuckles had gone white. She was still holding her fork. A piece of pecan pie sat untouched on the plate in front of her, the kind of pie that takes 12 minutes to eat when you're tired and just need 12 minutes. "I said let's go outside," Pruitt said. "Don't make me repeat myself again." Olivia looked at him the way you look at weather, not afraid, not angry, just measuring. "I'm just eating my pie," she said. He laughed again, tighter this time, and tightened his grip to match. The truckers looked away. The cook disappeared behind the partition. The teenage waitress took one step backward and bumped into the pie display case. What none of them knew, what nobody in Ashfield knew, was that the woman in the faded scrubs and the sensible shoes had spent 4 years as an Army combat medic in places that don't appear on the maps they show civilians. She had kept men alive in conditions that would make Pruitt's hand shake just to hear described. She had been decorated twice and had twice turned down promotions that would have moved her behind a desk. And 3 minutes ago, while Pruitt was still working up his theatrical entrance, she had pressed a contact on her phone that she had never expected to use in a place like this. The helicopters were already in the air. If you want to see where this story goes, and it goes somewhere none of them expected, follow along and hit like. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this one travels. It had started, like most ugly things in Ashfield, with paperwork. Olivia had picked up a double shift at Silver Creek Medical Center because they were short 2 nurses on the trauma floor and she couldn't walk past the schedule board without filling in a gap. That was a character flaw she'd never successfully corrected. She'd done 16 hours straight, the last 4 of which involved a construction accident, a septic infant, and an administrator named Gerald Holt, who kept appearing at the edge of scenes to ask about documentation timelines. By the time she clocked out, her lower back felt like a crime scene, and her sneakers had something on them she wasn't going to investigate. The Rusty Fork was 3 blocks from the hospital. It stayed open until 2. She had ordered the pie and the decaf and had been doing absolutely nothing wrong for 11 minutes when the patrol car pulled into the lot. She noticed the car the way she noticed most things, registered it, filed it, kept eating. She had no reason to pay it special attention. She was a nurse finishing a shift. The pie was good. The booth by the window had a draft, but she didn't mind drafts. Dale Pruitt came through the door like he owned the square footage. He was 6'1", built thick across the shoulders, with the specific energy of a man who had learned early that size could substitute for most other things. He scanned the diner, and his scan stopped on her. She couldn't have told you why. She'd replayed it afterward and still couldn't identify what she'd done or failed to do that made her the target. Maybe it was the scrubs. Maybe it was that she was sitting alone at 11:30 at night, and he'd decided that required explaining. Maybe it was just that he was having the kind of night where something needed to happen, and she was available. He came to her booth and stood at the end of it with his thumbs in his belt. "Late night," he said. "Yep," she said. "You work around here?" She looked up. "Silver Creek, nurse." "Uh-huh." He was already doing the thing where he looked around the diner instead of at her, like her answers were being submitted for review by someone else. "You got ID on you?" She set her fork down carefully. "Am I being detained?" That was when his expression changed. It was a small change, a tightening around the jaw, but she caught it. She'd learned to read faces in situations where reading them wrong had consequences. "I'm asking a question," he said. "So was I." She held his eyes. "Am I being detained, or am I free to finish eating?" The cook had gone quiet behind the partition. One of the truckers was very carefully not looking in their direction, which meant he was listening to everything. Pruitt pulled out the chair across from her and sat down without being invited, which told her something. Men who were secure in their authority didn't need to do that. They didn't need to take up physical space to compensate for the absence of a legitimate reason. "You got a smart mouth," he said. I've got a pecan pie getting cold, she said. If you want to tell me what this is actually about, I'm listening. He leaned forward. I got a call. Someone reported a woman matching your description acting suspiciously in the parking lot of the pharmacy on Clement Street. I wasn't on Clement Street tonight. Well, you match the description. I'm a blonde white woman in scrubs, she said. That's a lot of people in a town with a hospital. His jaw tightened again. You got a real attitude problem for someone who should be cooperating. I am cooperating. I told you where I work and what I'm doing here. That's cooperation. She picked up her fork again. If you want to formally detain me, you need a reason that holds up. Someone called, isn't it? What happened next happened fast. He stood up, came around the side of the table, and grabbed her arm. The left one, the scarred one. And the mug went off the table in the same motion, whether she knocked it or he caught it with his elbow. Later accounts would differ. It hit the tile floor and came apart in 3 pieces, and the sound was loud enough that the teenage waitress flinched backward and knocked the pie display case with her shoulder. The diner went completely silent. Olivia did not resist. This was a deliberate choice, not a passive one. She had been trained in situations where the wrong physical response created the wrong outcome, and she had learned, in conditions significantly more serious than this, that the most effective thing you could do sometimes was exactly nothing. She let him hold her arm. She kept her face neutral. She looked at him the way she'd looked at the weather. Outside, he said. Now. You're hurting my arm, she said. Her voice was completely level, informational, not accusatory. Then walk. Officer, said one of the truckers from the counter, voice low and unhappy. She didn't do anything. Pruitt didn't look at him. Sir, you need to stay out of this. She's right, though. She was just sitting there. I said stay out of it. The trucker subsided. People did, usually, when men like Pruitt used that voice. That was the calculation they were banking on, always, that everyone would do the math and decide it wasn't worth it. Olivia let him walk her toward the door. She didn't look panicked. She looked like a woman who had made a decision and was waiting for it to execute. The decision had been made approximately 4 minutes ago when she'd pressed the contact listed in her phone under a string of numbers that looked like an inventory code. The contact was a direct line to a federal military liaison office that had been assigned to her, technically still was assigned to her, because her current work with Silver Creek's trauma program intersected with an ongoing DoD initiative she couldn't discuss in contexts like this one. She had pressed that contact because she had recognized, within the first 90 seconds of Pruitt's approach, that the situation was not going to resolve through normal channels. She had assessed the room, assessed him, assessed the absence of any legitimate basis for what he was doing, and she had made the call. She had not, honestly, expected it to escalate to helicopters. That was a level of response she hadn't authorized, but whoever was on duty at the liaison office tonight had apparently made a different assessment. Pruitt pushed the diner door open with his free hand and walked her out into the parking lot, where the air was cool and carried the faint smell of rain that hadn't happened yet. His patrol car was parked at an angle across 2 spaces, light still going, painting the lot in slow blue rotations. You going to tell me what you actually pulled me out here for? She asked. You're being detained pending investigation of what, specifically? He didn't answer immediately, which was its own answer. He was working on the language, trying to build something out of what he had, which wasn't much. Suspicious behavior, he said finally. That's not a charge. It doesn't need to be a charge. It's a basis for detention. She looked at him steadily. You grabbed me without cause inside a restaurant where I was a paying customer eating a meal after a 16-hour hospital shift. You have no evidence connecting me to whatever you claim happened on Clement Street, and you have now physically removed me from the building. She paused. I want you to understand that I'm not telling you this to be difficult. I'm telling you because I think you're going to want to know that this conversation is being documented. Something moved across his face. Not fear yet. Not quite. More like the first awareness that he might have miscalculated something. Documented how? He said. She didn't answer. The sound came from the north first, a low rotational thrum that you felt in your sternum before you actually heard it with your ears. Both of them looked up instinctively. The sky to the north was dark and clear, stars visible between cloud cover, and then there were lights moving through the darkness, 2 sets, coming low and fast. Pruitt's head turned. What the? The second vehicle appeared on Route 9 before the helicopters touched down. Black SUVs moving in a convoy with their lights cutting through the quiet of the main road into Ashfield, taking the turn into the Rusty Fork parking lot with a speed that was precise rather than urgent, professional, practiced. 4 vehicles total. They arranged themselves in a loose perimeter around the lot with an efficiency that looked casual because the people doing it had done it many times before. The helicopter, one of them, settled into the field adjacent to the parking lot, the grass flattening in a violent circle. The other held position overhead. Both had running lights, but no markings visible from the ground. Dale Pruitt had let go of Olivia's arm. She hadn't told him to. He'd just done it, without apparently noticing, the way your hand moves away from something hot before your brain catches up to the signal. The SUVs had barely stopped rolling when doors were opening. 6 people in total, civilian clothes except for the 2 in military utility uniforms at the rear, all moving with the kind of controlled purpose that told you immediately that whatever this was, it was not improvised. The man who came toward them first was maybe 50, gray at the temples, wearing a jacket over a button-down with an ID badge clipped at his breast pocket. He walked directly to Olivia, and his path was so deliberate and so specifically aimed at her that Pruitt actually stepped back to get out of it without thinking about it. The man stopped in front of her. He looked at her arm briefly, the one Pruitt had been holding, and then at her face. "Captain Bennett," he said, "we're taking it from here." Dale Pruitt went very still. Olivia nodded once. "Thank you, Major." "You all right?" "I'm fine." A beat. "My pie's still inside." The Major, his name was Ehrlich, she'd worked with him twice before in circumstances she wasn't going to summarize here, almost smiled. "We'll take care of that." He turned to Pruitt, not aggressively, just turned, the way you turn to address a fact. "Officer," he said, and his voice was the voice of someone who has had this kind of conversation before and knows exactly how much pressure is required. "I'm going to need you to tell me, in your own words, what led to your physical contact with this individual tonight." Pruitt's mouth opened, then it closed. He started. Stopped. "She was reported in connection with those." What was the nature of the report? Suspicious behavior near. What specifically was reported? What behavior? What location? What time the call came in and from which number? Pruitt had the look of a man going through his pockets for something he'd left at home. "There was a call," he said. "Dispatch logged it. We'll be requesting those records," Ehrlich said. "In the meantime, I need you to remain in the parking lot. Someone will take your statement." A woman in civilian clothes, younger, with a tablet, moving with a quiet efficiency that suggested she was used to rooms where things were happening fast, appeared at Pruitt's elbow as if she'd been waiting for a cue. Pruitt looked at her. He looked at the SUVs. He looked at the helicopter that was still sitting in the field, its blades winding down to a low rotation. He looked at Olivia. "Who is she?" he said. His voice had lost something. Some layer of certainty. "That's not information you need right now," Ehrlich said pleasantly. "What you need right now is to cooperate fully with the federal investigators who are going to want to speak with you." Olivia turned and walked back toward the diner door. No. Inside, the Rusty Fork had the specific atmosphere of a room where everyone had just witnessed something they were still processing. The teenage waitress was standing in the exact same spot she'd been in when the mug broke. One of the truckers had his phone out, but wasn't doing anything with it. The cook had come out from behind the partition and was leaning against the counter with his arms folded. Olivia walked back to her booth and sat down. Her pie was still there, still mostly intact. She picked up her fork. The trucker who had spoken up earlier caught her eye. He was maybe 60, with a salt and pepper beard and the particular weathered look of someone who had spent a lot of years behind a wheel, and he didn't say anything, just gave her a small nod that she returned. The waitress came over after a minute, moving carefully like she was navigating something fragile. She refilled the decaf without being asked. "You okay?" she said quietly. "Yeah," Olivia said. "I'm good." The girl stood there for a second like she wanted to say something else, something more substantial, but wasn't sure she had the language for it. She ended up just nodding and going back to the counter. Through the window, Olivia could see Ehrlich's people moving with the organized calm of a process already fully in motion. Someone had set up portable lights on two of the SUVs. Someone else was photographing the parking lot. The woman with the tablet was talking to Pruitt, and Pruitt looked smaller than he had 20 minutes ago. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't satisfying in the way she'd have wanted it to be when she was 23 and still believed justice had a particular aesthetic. It was just process, procedure, the slow grind of documentation. She ate her pie. She was halfway through it when Major Ehrlich came inside and slid into the booth across from her, uninvited but not unwelcome. He looked at her arm again. "He grab you hard?" "I've had worse," she said. "I know you have." He folded his hands on the table. "We've got the call log from dispatch. The complaint call came in from an unregistered number. Whoever reported you, if there was a real report, we can't confirm it yet." "You think he made it up?" "I think there's a question about whether any call happened at all." Ehrlich's expression was professionally neutral, and I think that's a question with implications. "How many of his prior stops are you looking at?" He looked at her. "You heard something?" "You work in a hospital long enough, you hear things. People come in with stories. They don't always file reports, but they talk." She pushed the pie plate aside. "There's a woman. Comes into the ER sometimes for her daughter's asthma. She mentioned an incident about 6 months ago. A traffic stop that went sideways. She said she didn't report it because she didn't think anything would come of it." Ehrlich made a note. Not on a phone or tablet. Actual pen, actual small notebook. She'd always liked that about him. "We're going to need to talk to her," he said. "I can try to get you a name. I can't promise she'll want to come forward." "Understood." He closed the notebook. "Bennett, I want to be straight with you. What we do with this from here, the scope of it, that's going to depend on what we find in the next 48 hours. There may be pressure from local officials to keep the footprint small. And I'm telling you so you know it's a variable. Not because I think it'll change the outcome." He met her eyes. "You've got documentation of tonight. We've got documentation of tonight. The witnesses in this room are going to be interviewed." "The cook saw everything," she said. "Both truckers." "We know." He stood up. "Someone will drive you home when you're ready, or back to the hospital if you need to go back." "I'm done for the night," she said. He nodded. Started to go, then stopped. "For what it's worth, the fact that you called it in instead of handling it differently. I'm not doing that here," she said quietly. He understood what she meant. He left. Outside, Dale Pruitt was sitting in the back of one of the black SUVs. Not under arrest, not yet. Just contained, just separated from his patrol car and the parking lot. Being held in the specific legal limbo of someone who has not yet been charged with anything, but who is no longer running the room. Through the window of the SUV, his face was visible in the portable lights, and he was looking at his hands. The teenage waitress was at the counter talking to a woman in a dark jacket who had a recording device clipped to her lapel. The waitress kept nodding, kept gesturing toward the booth where Olivia was sitting. Her hands moved when she talked. One of the truckers was outside, giving a statement to a young agent with a laptop open on the hood of his car. The trucker was pointing toward the parking lot, toward the spot where Pruitt had walked Olivia through the door, and the agent was typing steadily. The cook was last. He came out from the kitchen with his arms uncrossed for the first time all night, and he sat down across from an investigator and started talking immediately, without preamble, without anyone having to pull it out of him. He'd clearly been waiting for someone to ask. Olivia watched all of it through the window and felt something she couldn't have named exactly. Not satisfaction. Satisfaction had a specific feeling, and this wasn't it. It was more like the absence of something. The specific silence of a room where a sound you'd been ignoring had finally stopped. She had known, from the moment Pruitt walked through the door, how this particular dynamic worked. She had seen it before in different forms. The calculation that certain people can be treated a certain way because no one will intervene, because the cost of intervention is higher than the cost of compliance. She had spent years in environments where those calculations were made every day, just about different things, in different registers. She had also learned that the calculation broke down under a specific condition. Documentation. Evidence. The accumulation of verifiable fact. Not because systems were inherently just, she had no illusions about that, but because the math changed when there were receipts. She had receipts tonight. Her phone buzzed. A message from the charge nurse at Silver Creek, which meant the gossip network was already running. "Are you okay? Someone said there were helicopters at the Rusty Fork?" She typed back. "Fine. Long story. See you Friday." She put the phone face down and looked out the window again. Pruitt was still looking at his hands. The young agent was still typing. The waitress had stopped talking and was now just sitting very still, the way people sit when something has happened that they know they're going to be processing for a while. Outside, past the lights and the vehicles and the measured movement of federal investigators doing their work, Ashfield looked exactly the same as it always did at midnight. The gas station sign blinking its slow blink, the traffic light on Route 9 cycling through its colors for nobody, the dark windows of the hardware store and the pharmacy and the insurance office, all the ordinary infrastructure of a town that looked fine from the outside. But Olivia had been a trauma nurse long enough to know that things that looked fine from the outside were sometimes in the most trouble. You learned that. You learned to look past the presentation and ask what was actually happening underneath. She was thinking about the woman who came in with her daughter for asthma treatments, thinking about what she'd said and how she'd said it. Not angry, just tired. The tired of someone who had decided a long time ago that certain things were just true and immovable, the way weather was true and immovable, and that there was no particular point in trying to change them. Olivia had her name in her phone. Had it because she kept notes, because she'd been in the habit of keeping notes since the Army, because the Army had taught her that the thing you don't write down is the thing you lose. She opened her phone, scrolled, found the name. She stared at it for a moment, aware that what happened next, whether she passed this along to Ehrlich tonight or waited, whether the woman agreed to talk or didn't, whether 48 hours produced the kind of evidence that turned a bad incident into a prosecutable pattern. None of that was guaranteed. She'd been in enough situations to know that processes could stall, that pressure from local officials wasn't theoretical, that what looked like momentum could hit a wall you didn't see coming. She also knew something else, that every time something like this got buried, it was because at each individual decision point, the person with information made the conservative choice. Filed nothing, said nothing, decided the math didn't work out in their favor and stopped there. She typed a message to Ehrlich, included the name. Then she finished her coffee, left a 20 on the table. She always overtipped, it was another uncorrected flaw, and walked out into the parking lot to find someone to drive her home. The air smelled like the rain that still hadn't come. The helicopter in the field had gone completely still. Across the parking lot, the door of the black SUV opened, and Dale Pruitt was helped out of it by two agents, not roughly, just firmly, and walked toward a second vehicle. He passed within 20 feet of Olivia without looking at her. She didn't watch him go. She was already looking at her phone, at the message she'd just sent, at the name she'd handed over, thinking about the woman who came in with her daughter, and talked in the specific tired way of someone who had given up on being heard. She thought, okay, we'll see. Not triumphant, not resolved, just forward. The only direction that had ever made sense to her. The agent assigned to drive her home was young, 20s, and tried to make conversation for about 30 seconds before reading the room correctly and going quiet. The town passed by the windows in its midnight version, ordinary, dark, contained. Olivia looked out the window and thought about what Ehrlich had said. 48 hours. She knew what that meant. She knew what it didn't mean. She knew that between tonight and 48 hours from now, there were phone calls happening already. Calls from Pruitt's union rep. Calls from whoever his supervisor was. Calls from people who had spent years building a structure around exactly this kind of situation. Exactly for moments like this one. She also knew that those calls were going out to a set of people who, as of tonight, had a federal investigation standing between them and the ability to make this go away quietly. Which wasn't the same as saying it was going to be fine, but it was different from how things were 3 hours ago, before she'd walked into the Rusty Fork with tired feet and a 16-hour shift behind her and the simple intention of eating a piece of pie in peace. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a number she recognized. The hospital's administrative line, which meant someone in administration had heard something and was already calculating. She let it go to voicemail. She'd deal with Silver Creek tomorrow. Right now, there was just the road and the rain that was finally starting to come, tapping against the windshield in the specific way it did when it had been holding off all night and had finally run out of reasons to wait. The rain came in sideways by the time the agent dropped her off, the kind of rain that makes you realize your jacket has never actually been waterproof, and Olivia stood on her porch for a moment after the SUV pulled away and just let it hit her. Not dramatically, she was just tired, and sometimes when you're tired, you stand in the rain for a second before going inside because the cold is easier to feel than everything else. Her apartment was the second floor of a converted Victorian on Alderman Street, 3 blocks from the hospital, chosen specifically because she could walk to work and walk to the grocery and theoretically never need a car, though she had a car. The inside smelled like old wood and the lavender thing her neighbor Mrs. Packett had given her at Christmas that she kept meaning to throw away but hadn't. She dropped her bag, pulled off her shoes without untying them, and stood in the kitchen drinking water from the tap because she hadn't done dishes in 4 days and the clean glasses were all in the drying rack at the back of the counter, and that felt far away. She thought about calling her sister, then decided against it. Her sister worried in a specific active way that required management, and Olivia didn't have the bandwidth to manage anyone else's worry right now. She thought about the woman with the asthmatic daughter, the name she'd sent to Ehrlich. She thought about Gerald Holt's voicemail, which she hadn't listened to yet, which was sitting in her phone like a small, unexploded thing. She listened to it. "Olivia, this is Gerald. I've heard there was an incident tonight involving law enforcement, and look, I need you to call me first thing tomorrow before you speak to anyone from the press or any outside agency. It's important that we present a unified front from a communication standpoint. Call me." He'd left it at 12:43 a.m. Gerald Holt, who went home at 5:30 every day without exception and complained about being reachable after hours, had been awake at 12:43 in the morning to leave her a message about communication strategy. She set the phone down and went to bed. She did not call Gerald first thing. First thing, she made coffee, ate half a piece of toast, and read through the 3 news alerts that had already picked up something. None of them accurate, all of them in the specific breathless register of local news trying to confirm a story faster than it can be confirmed. Federal vehicles spotted in Ashfield overnight. Law enforcement sources confirm ongoing investigation. Developing. Her phone had 17 unread messages. She read the ones from colleagues, a mix of concern and barely contained curiosity, and left the rest. Major Ehrlich had sent one at 7 a.m. "Call when you're up." She called. "We've got the dispatch records," he said, no preamble. The complaint call came in from a number registered to a prepaid device purchased at a gas station in Harlow County 8 months ago. No identifying information. So there was a call. There was a call. Whether it was legitimate or manufactured, that's the question. She could hear him moving, the sound of a room with multiple conversations happening in the background. "We also pulled Pruitt's body cam from last night." "And?" "He turned it off," Ehrlich said, at 11:31 p.m., 17 minutes before he walked into the Rusty Fork. "Department policy requires continuous recording during all civilian contacts. He turned it off." She let that sit for a second. "That's not an accident." "No, it's not an accident." His voice was even. "Bennett, I want to be careful about what I tell you at this stage because you're technically a witness. But I think you should know that what we're looking at may be larger than one officer and one incident." "I thought it might be," she said. "We're going to need you available today. Not necessarily formally, but if questions come up, I'm working a half shift at 2. I can be available until then." "That works." A pause. "The union rep for the department called our office this morning. Standard procedure, nothing unusual, but the call came in at 6:15. That's not standard hours." "No," he said. "It's not." She hung up and finished her coffee, which had gone slightly cold, and thought about Pruitt in the back of that SUV looking at his hands. "Bartes." She made it 40 minutes before Gerald Holt called her directly. "I left you a message," he said, which was his version of, "Where have you been?" "I know. I was sleeping, Gerald." "Olivia." He had a specific voice he used when he was about to say something he'd prepared. Measured, like he was reading slightly above his own head. I need you to understand that the hospital's position in this matter is one of complete neutrality. What happened last night was between you and local law enforcement, and Silver Creek cannot be perceived as having a stake in whatever this investigation turns out to be. I'm a Silver Creek employee who was physically grabbed without cause while wearing Silver Creek scrubs, she said. I'm not sure how the hospital stays neutral on that. That's exactly the kind of framing we want to avoid, he said quickly. The optics of, Gerald, she stopped him. I'm not going to hold a press conference. I'm not going to go to the news. I'm going to go to work in 4 hours and do my job. Is that sufficient? A pause. I'd appreciate it if you'd run any communication through our legal office before. I'll see you at 2, she said, and hung up. She stared at the ceiling for a moment, then she picked up her phone and called Vera Dunmore. Vera Dunmore was 51 years old and worked the housekeeping rotation at Silver Creek on the morning shift. She was also the woman who came in twice a month with her daughter Camille, who had asthma that was well managed until the weather changed, and who had mentioned approximately 9 weeks ago in the corridor outside the pediatric intake room that she'd had a bad experience with a local officer on a traffic stop that she hadn't reported because she didn't see the point. The phone rang 5 times. Olivia almost hung up. Then, hello? Vera, it's Olivia Bennett from the ER. Silence. Then, I heard something happened to you last night. Yes, I'm okay. She kept her voice simple. Vera, I know this might be a hard call to get. I'm not going to pretend otherwise, but I gave your name to a federal investigator last night, and I want to be straight with you about that before anyone else reaches you. Another silence. Longer. You gave them my name. I gave them your name as someone who might have relevant information. I should have told you I was going to do that. I didn't, and that wasn't right. She meant it. She'd been thinking about it since last night. You don't have to talk to them. Nobody can make you. She heard Vera's breathing on the line, heard what sounded like a television in the background being turned down. The officer who stopped me, Vera said finally. Last April, he wasn't in uniform. He was in a department vehicle, but he was in street clothes. He followed me off the highway for 2 miles before he hit his lights. Olivia said nothing. Let her go. He told me my registration was expired. It wasn't. I knew it wasn't. I had just renewed it, but I didn't say that because... A short pause. Because he had his hand on his door handle, and he was looking at me a certain way, and I just decided to let him write whatever he was going to write and go home. Did he write anything? No, he ran my plates for 11 minutes. Then he told me to have a good night. She stopped. The way he said it. Vera, was his name Pruitt? Dale Pruitt? The silence was its own answer, then, yes. Olivia closed her eyes. Okay. Thank you for telling me. If a federal investigator named Ehrlich calls you, it's legitimate. You don't have to talk to him. But if you decide to, what you just told me is exactly the kind of thing he needs to hear. Will it do anything? Vera asked. Not bitterly, just asking the actual question. I don't know, Olivia said. I think it has a better chance of doing something than it did yesterday. She heard Vera exhale. All right, Vera said. All right, if he calls. She texted Ehrlich, Vera Dunmore. She'll talk if you call her today. Don't wait. He responded in 4 minutes. On it. She got dressed, ate the other half of her toast cold, and drove to Silver Creek 2 hours early because she couldn't sit in the apartment anymore, and the hospital at least had the virtue of demanding her attention in directions she knew how to handle. The ER was running medium, not slammed, not quiet. The particular in-between state where there's enough happening that nobody's bored, but not so much that the seams are showing. She checked in with Priya, the charge nurse on duty, who handed her a tablet and said, "Third bay, chest pain, 62, vitals are inconsistent," and that was that. She was back. She worked through the chest pain, which turned out to be musculoskeletal from 3 days of moving furniture, and through a kid with a broken wrist, and through an elderly man who'd come in for a prescription question that had somehow ended up in the ER because his pharmacy was closed. She was charting in the corridor when she became aware that the energy at the nurse's station had changed. She looked up. Gerald Holt was walking through the ER with 2 people she didn't recognize. a man in a gray suit, and a woman in a blazer with a lanyard that she couldn't read from this distance. They were moving with the specific directed energy of people who knew where they were going and had a purpose they hadn't announced yet. They were heading toward her. She straightened up and waited. "Olivia," Gerald said, arriving with the look of a man performing calm. "This is Patricia Wynn and Donald Reese from the hospital's legal office." He said legal office the way people say everything's fine. "They just want to have a quick, Ms. Bennett," Wynn said, stepping slightly ahead of Gerald in a way that was probably not accidental. She was mid-40s, direct eye contact, the specific controlled friendliness of someone in legal who has learned that warmth is a tool. "We appreciate your time. We know you had quite a night." "I'm in the middle of a shift," Olivia said. "This won't take long." Wynn smiled. "We just want to understand the situation from a risk management perspective, particularly around any communications you may have had with outside agencies about the events of last night." "Outside agencies," Olivia repeated. "Federal investigators," Reese said. He had a tablet in his hand and hadn't looked up from it yet, which was its own kind of message. "We understand you've been in contact." "I have." "The hospital would prefer that any further contact go through our legal office," Wynn said, "just to make sure we're coordinating appropriately." Olivia looked at her steadily. "The federal contact is about something that happened to me as a private citizen, off hospital property, after my shift ended. The hospital's legal office doesn't have standing to coordinate my communication with investigators about that." Wynn's smile stayed in place. "Of course, you're right in the technical sense. We're simply offering—" "I understand what you're offering." She tucked her tablet under her arm. "I need to get back to my patients." She walked back to the third bay. Behind her, she heard Gerald Holt saying something to Wynn in a low voice, and she didn't turn around to hear what it was, because she already knew what it was going to be. Some version of "she's difficult," some version of "this is going to be a problem." She'd heard those versions before. They never said anything new. The afternoon got busier. 2 car accidents came in from the Route 9 corridor, minor, both parties ambulatory, and then a man who'd been stung by something in his backyard and was having a reaction that was moving faster than he'd expected. She managed the allergic response with Priya and the on-call attending, and by the time the man was stable and transferred upstairs, the ER had that particular wrung-out quiet that follows a near miss. She was charting again when her phone buzzed. Ehrlich. She stepped into the family consultation room. Small, 2 chairs, a box of tissues on the table, the universal hospital room for news nobody wants, and answered. "Vera Dunmore talked to us," he said, "for 40 minutes. "Good." She wasn't the only one. "We've been making calls based on department records, cross-referencing stop patterns, and we've now got 4 individuals who had encounters with Pruitt over the last 14 months that follow a similar profile. Stops without clear cause, no citations issued, behavior during stops that was outside normal parameters." "How far outside?" "2 of them said he made physical contact without cause. Neither filed a report." Olivia sat down in one of the consultation chairs. "Because they didn't think it would go anywhere." "That's exactly what they said." "In those words." Ehrlich paused. "Bennett, we're also looking at his supervisor, Captain Warren Lyle. The body cam deactivation last night. That's not a lone actor decision. Someone taught him that was an option, or at minimum allowed him to develop the habit without consequence." "What does that mean for the timeline?" "It means this doesn't wrap in 48 hours. We're looking at a pattern investigation now, which has a different scope and a different process." He hesitated, which was unusual for him. "It also means there's going to be pressure, not on you directly. You're a federal witness in an active investigation that protects you in specific ways, but on the people around you. The hospital. People who care about keeping things quiet." "I already got the visit from legal," she said. "I figured. It was fast." "Everything moves fast in a small town," she said. "The hospital administration is scared. They don't want federal attention." "The hospital administration may need to recalibrate what they're scared of," Ehrlich said. And for the first time since she'd known him, she heard something underneath the professional neutrality. Not anger exactly, but the particular edge of a person who has seen too many situations where institutions protected themselves over people. She sat with that for a second. "There's something else," he said. "Tell me." "Captain Lyle made a call this morning, before we'd officially notified the department of the investigation's scope. The call was to a city councilman named Garrett Summer. Lyle and Summer have a relationship that goes back. We're still mapping it, but there are financial records that are going to require a closer look." He stopped. "I'm telling you this because I think you need to understand the shape of what you walked into. Last night you had a bad experience with a bad cop. That's real and that's prosecutable on its own, but it may also be a corner of something that's been running for a while." Olivia looked at the box of tissues on the table. She thought about the woman who came in with her daughter for asthma. She thought about the specific tired way Vera had said, "I just decided to let him write whatever he was going to write and go home." "How long do you think it's been running?" she asked. "Based on what we're finding, at least 3 years, possibly longer." She exhaled slowly. 3 years of Vera Dunmore's. 3 years of people calculating that the cost of saying something was higher than the cost of absorbing it quietly and going home. "What do you need from me?" she asked. "Right now, nothing specific. Stay available. If the scope expands to include Summer or others in local government, there may be a formal interview." He paused. "And Bennett, if anyone at that hospital tries to pressure you in ways that feel coercive, I want to know about it." "Understood." She went back to work. The ER picked up again around 5. It always did, that dinner-hour surge of people who'd been ignoring something all day and finally ran out of reasons to. And she moved through it with the focused economy that 16 years of nursing had built into her body, the part of the work that was almost physical memory by now. She was between patients, standing at the supply cart in the corridor, when a young nurse named Tobias came up beside her, looking like he was trying to figure out how to say something. "What?" she said, not unkindly. "Holt wants to see you in his office," Tobias said. "He's been asking for the last hour, but I didn't want to interrupt when you were—" He gestured vaguely toward the trauma rooms. "Is it urgent clinically?" "No, it's—" Tobias hesitated. "He's got someone with him, a man I don't recognize, and he had Mrs. Wynne from legal in there earlier." She handed him the supply cart inventory and walked to Holt's office. Gerald Holt's office had a view of the parking structure, which he had compensated for with 2 potted plants and a framed aerial photograph of Ashfield that he'd bought at a charity auction, and which made the town look considerably more picturesque than it was. He was sitting behind his desk. Beside him, in the chair that was usually reserved for people receiving bad news, sat a man she didn't know, 50-something, in a good suit, with the specific comfortable confidence of someone who is used to being the most important person in a room. "Olivia," Gerald said, "this is Councilman Summer." She stopped. Garrett Summer stood and extended his hand. "Ms. Bennett, I've heard a great deal about you today." She shook his hand because not doing so would have told him something she didn't want him to know yet. His grip was firm in the way that people practice. His smile was the same. "I imagine you have," she said. "Please, sit down." He gestured toward the other chair as if he were the host of this room, which he was not. She stayed standing, which she could tell registered. "I'll be direct," he said, settling back. "I'm here because I care about this community. The Ashfield Police Department serves this town, and the people in it, officers, their families, deserve fair consideration before a federal investigation creates a narrative that may not tell the full story." She looked at him. "What narrative would that be?" "Dale Pruitt is a young officer who made a judgment call that—" "He turned off his body camera," she said, 17 minutes before he walked into that diner. Summer's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. "I'm not here to debate specifics. I'm here to see if there's a way to—" He chose his word carefully. "Contextualize this situation that protects everyone's interests." "Councilman," she said, and her voice was exactly as level as it had been in the parking lot when Pruitt was squeezing her arm, "I'm going to be transparent with you. I'm a witness in an active federal investigation. This conversation, right now, in this room, with you telling me you want to protect everyone's interests, I'm going to need to report it." The silence that followed was approximately 4 seconds long. She counted. Summer stood slowly. The comfortable confidence had not disappeared exactly, but it had shifted, rearranged itself into something that was working harder. Of course, he said. I'm just a concerned community member. I understand. She stepped aside so he had a clear path to the door. Thank you for coming in. He left. Gerald Holt sat very still at his desk. Gerald, she said, you should call your own legal office, not the hospital's. Your own. She walked out before he could answer. In the corridor, she pulled out her phone and typed a message to Ehrlich. Garrett Summer just came to my workplace, said he wanted to contextualize the situation. I have a witness, Tobias Wren, floor nurse, saw Summer in Holt's office. She sent it, then added, you need to move faster than you were planning to. His reply came in under 3 minutes. Agreed. Stay where you are. We're sending someone to take your statement about the Summer contact. This changes the timeline. She put the phone in her pocket and went back to her patients, because the work didn't stop for any of this, because it never had, and never would. Because the thing she'd understood a long time ago was that keeping people alive and keeping yourself sane were not separate activities, but the same one, just viewed from different angles. An hour later, she was in the middle of a wound assessment on a construction worker who'd opened his palm on a piece of rebar when Priya appeared in the doorway with an expression Olivia had learned to read as something is happening that is not a patient. There's a woman here, Priya said quietly. She's asking for you by name. Not a patient. She looks scared, Olivia. Who is she? Priya held out a piece of paper where she'd written the name because she didn't want to say it in the corridor. Olivia looked at it. The name was Sandra Pruitt, Dale Pruitt's wife. She finished the wound closure, efficiently, cleanly, her hands doing the work while her mind was already in the next room. Handed off to Priya for discharge instructions, stripped her gloves, and walked to the family waiting area where a woman in her mid-30s sat alone in the corner chair with a toddler asleep across her lap, and her hands pressed together in her lap, and the specific look of someone who had driven somewhere before they'd fully decided to. Mrs. Pruitt, Olivia said, sitting in the chair across from her. Sandra Pruitt looked at her. Her eyes were dry, but the rims were red. The kind of red that comes from hours of crying that has temporarily run out. I don't know why I came here, she said. That's okay, Olivia said. You came. That's enough. Sandra looked at the sleeping toddler, then back at Olivia. He told me last night that it was going to be fine, that his union rep would handle it. She stopped. But then this morning the federal people called the house, and I don't think it's going to be fine. I can't tell you what the investigation is going to find, Olivia said carefully. I'm a witness. There are things I can't discuss. I know. Sandra's jaw worked. I'm not asking you to. She stopped. Started again. He's done things before this that I didn't report anything because he's my husband, and I thought I was supposed to. I don't know what I thought. Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, not dramatically, just the small audible fracture of someone holding something too tightly for too long. Olivia leaned slightly forward. Sandra, do you have someone you can stay with, a family member, a friend? Sandra looked at her like the question hadn't occurred to her yet. My sister's in Groveton. I think you should call her tonight. She said it simply. Not pressure, just the next thing. Not because of anything specific, just because you should not be alone with a toddler trying to figure out what comes next. Sandra looked at the sleeping child. Her hand moved automatically to the kid's back, the unconscious gesture of a parent checking that someone is still there, still breathing. He told me you were nothing, Sandra said quietly. When he came home earlier this year, talking about the hospital, about the nurses, he said that. She's nothing. I didn't ask who he meant. She looked at Olivia. I should have asked. Olivia didn't answer that directly because there was no good answer to it, and she knew it. Call your sister, she said, tonight. Sandra Pruitt gathered her sleeping child with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had done it 10,000 times, stood up, and walked toward the exit without looking back. At the door, she paused for 1 second, just one, and then she was gone into the parking lot and the early dark. Olivia sat in the empty waiting room for a moment. The chair where Sandra had been sitting was still slightly warm. Her phone buzzed. Ehrlich again. Federal prosecutors have been briefed. We're escalating. I need you at the field office at 8 a.m. tomorrow. This is formal now. Also, Summers' financial records just came in from a parallel investigation that's been running in the state AG's office for 6 months. Bennett? He's been there the whole time. Deeper than we thought. She read it twice. Then she read it a third time, because the words parallel investigation and 6 months were doing something to the shape of everything she thought she'd understood about last night. A single bad cop making a bad call in a diner. That was what she'd walked into. That was what she'd been carrying. But there had been a parallel investigation running for 6 months, which meant someone, somewhere, had already been watching, had already been building, had already known that Ashfield had a problem that went past Dale Pruitt and his deactivated body camera and his parking lot behavior. And last night, completely by accident, by nothing more than the coincidence of wanting a piece of pecan pie after a 16-hour shift, she had handed them something they hadn't had. A witness with a federal profile, a documented incident with federal response, a thread that, when pulled, was attached to the larger fabric they'd been trying to map for half a year. She put her phone in her pocket and walked back to the nurse's station, where Tobias was updating charts and Priya was arguing pleasantly with the pharmacy about a dosage discrepancy, and the ER was doing what it always did, holding the line between what the body could handle and what it couldn't, one patient at a time. In a building full of people who mostly hadn't been told yet what was happening 2 floors down in the administrative wing, where Gerald Holt's office light was still on at 7:15 in the evening. She looked at the board, checked the pending patients, put her phone in her pocket. She did not, in that moment, know that the next morning's 8 a.m. meeting at the federal field office was going to be interrupted before it started by an emergency call from Silver Creek Medical Center. Not about the investigation, not about Pruitt, not about Garrett Summer or Warren Lyle or any of the things she'd been carrying since the night before. About a disaster. The kind that didn't ask whether you were ready. The call came in at 6:48 a.m. She was already dressed, coffee in hand, keys on the counter, 17 minutes from leaving for the federal field office, when her pager went off and her phone rang simultaneously. The double signal that Silver Creek used only when the ER was entering mass casualty protocol. She answered without sitting down. It's Priya. Gas line rupture at the Caldwell processing plant on the east side. Multiple explosions. We've got incoming. They're saying 30 plus, Olivia. Maybe more. The first ambulances are 8 minutes out, and we have 4 trauma nurses on shift. 4 nurses. 30 patients minimum. She was already picking up her keys. Call everyone on the secondary roster, she said. Don't wait for Holt to authorize it. Just call them. And get respiratory on standby. Gas plant means inhalation injuries, chemical burns, blast trauma. You're going to need the burn kits from storage, not just the cart. Holt's already here, Priya said. He's trying to reach the on-call attending. Where's Dr. Fassbender? 20 minutes out. 20 minutes was a different world. 20 minutes from now, the first wave would already be on the tables. I'm 6 minutes away, Olivia said. Don't let Holt restructure the bay assignments until I get there. She was in her car before the call ended. The ER, when she arrived, was in the specific pre-storm state of controlled urgency. People moving fast, but not yet at the pitch they were about to hit. The kind of preparation that feels almost calm until it doesn't. She pushed through the ambulance bay doors, and Priya met her with a tablet, already running through the incoming triage data from the field paramedics. First unit is 3 minutes, Priya said. Paramedics are reporting blast injuries, structural crush, at least 6 with suspected inhalation. 2 cardiac events in the field. 1 stabilized, 1 they lost on scene. Olivia scanned the board. 4 trauma bays open. 2 procedure rooms. The overflow corridor wasn't equipped for this, but it was going to have to be. Set up the corridor for secondary triage, she said. Walking wounded go there first. We don't put them in bays we're going to need for critical. She looked at Tobias, who was pulling equipment from the storage room. Tobias, burn kits, all of them, on the corridor cart, and get the portable O2 units out of supply. That requires Holt's key. Get them, she said, and the particular quality of her voice ended that sentence cleanly. Gerald Holt appeared from the direction of his office, with a look that was trying to be authoritative and landing closer to overwhelmed. Olivia, I need to coordinate with you on the resource allocation before. Gerald, I need you to make sure radiology is cleared and ready for priority imaging, and that the blood bank is on standby for O-neg. Can you do that?" He opened his mouth. "Those are the two things that will matter in about 90 seconds, she said. "Everything else can wait." He went. The first ambulance backed into the bay and the doors opened, and then there was no more preparation, only response. "Bat satam." The next 40 minutes were the kind that collapsed time. Not chaotic. Chaos was what happened when training failed. This was saturated, every second dense with decision and action and the specific physical reality of bodies that had been damaged in multiple simultaneous ways and needed to be sorted and stabilized faster than any system was really designed for. The blast injuries came in clusters. Blast lung was the priority killer. Lungs damaged by overpressure wave, presenting deceptively stable and then crashing without warning. She identified 2 probable cases in the first 10 minutes and had them on continuous monitoring before the on-call attending was through the door. Dr. Fassbender arrived at 7:14, a compact man in his 50s who went straight to work without introduction, the particular efficiency of someone who had done mass casualty response before and knew that orientation was a luxury. He looked at her setup, looked at the board, and said, "Good call on the corridor." And that was all the communication they needed. She was managing the secondary triage line when Priya appeared at her elbow with an expression that broke through the controlled surface of the room. "Bay 3, Priya said, low. "They just brought him in with the 3rd ambulance. He's bad, Olivia." "Name?" Priya hesitated one beat. "It's a deputy from the Ashfield PD. He was apparently at the plant on a welfare check call when the second explosion happened." She moved to Bay 3. The man on the table was in his 30s, in a deputy's uniform that had been partially cut away by the paramedics, with blast burns on his left arm and neck, and the specific labored quality of breathing that said his chest wall had taken damage. His oxygen saturation was 89 and dropping. The paramedic finishing his handoff was reading vitals in the flat, rapid cadence of field medicine. She looked at his face. Didn't recognize him. Not Pruitt, not Lyle. Someone she hadn't seen before. It didn't matter. "Get me a chest tray," she said, "and I need respiratory in here now." The next 18 minutes were technical and precise, and she didn't think about anything except the work. The deputy's right lung had partially collapsed. Pneumothorax from the blast wave, the kind that looked survivable and became unsurvivable fast if you waited. She didn't wait. The needle decompression bought them time. The chest tube bought them more. His saturation came up to 94 and his breathing lost its desperate quality and became merely labored, which was manageable. She was stepping back from the table, stripping her gloves, when she registered that someone was in the doorway of Bay 3 who shouldn't have been. Warren Lyle, captain of the Ashfield PD. In uniform, no visible injuries, standing at the edge of the bay with a look that moved across the deputy on the table, across the equipment, and then landed on her. "That's Deputy Harmon," Lyle said. His voice had something in it she couldn't categorize immediately. "He's going to be okay?" "He's stabilized," she said. "You need to be in the waiting area." "I know." He didn't move. "I came in with the injured officers, 4 of them." A pause. "I know who you are. I know what's happening with the investigation." She held his gaze. "Captain, this isn't the time or place. I'm not here to threaten you." He said it quietly, bluntly. The specific bluntness of someone who has made a decision and is past the part where they go back. "I came to see Harmon, and I—" He stopped. His jaw moved. I turned a blind eye. To Pruitt. To a lot of things I should have reported up the chain instead of managing internally. The ER noise continued around them, indifferent. "You should be telling that to the federal investigators," she said. "Not to me." "I know." He looked at Harmon on the table one more time, then he turned and walked out of the bay without another word. She stood there for approximately 3 seconds, processing what that meant for the case timeline and what it meant for the morning's meeting she hadn't made it to, and then her pager went off again and she went back to the floor. She pulled out her phone between patients and sent Ehrlich a single message. "Lyle was just in my ER. He said he turned a blind eye. Get someone here." The reply came in 2 minutes. "Already on the way." Don't let him leave the building if you can manage it without confrontation. She looked up. Through the ER's glass partition, she could see Lyle in the waiting area, sitting in a chair with his elbows on his knees and his hat in his hands. He wasn't going anywhere. She went back to work. 40 minutes later, with the mass casualty surge beginning its slow exhale, critical patients transferred or stabilized, the corridor triage line thinning, Fassbender moving between bays with the efficient economy of someone running on competence and bad coffee, she became aware of a different quality of attention in the room. She looked up. Ehrlich was at the ER entrance. Beside him stood a woman she hadn't seen before. Late 40s, with a federal prosecutor's ID clipped at her jacket, the specific look of someone who had been briefed in a moving vehicle and arrived ready. 2 agents flanked them. They were not looking at Olivia. They were looking at Warren Lyle, still sitting in the waiting area with his hat in his hands. Lyle looked up when they approached. For a moment, nobody moved. Then he stood, slowly, the way men stand when they've decided something is finished, and said something to the prosecutor that Olivia couldn't hear through the glass. Whatever he said, the prosecutor nodded once. One of the agents produced a recording device. Tobias appeared at Olivia's shoulder. "What's happening?" "I think," she said, watching Lyle begin to talk, "that someone just decided the math had changed." The ER continued around them. A monitor alarm, Priya's voice calling a bay number, the soft percussion of a facility that never fully stopped. And Olivia turned back to the board because there were still patients, and still work, and still the long middle distance between a thing beginning to fall and a thing fully resolved. Her phone buzzed one more time. Not Ehrlich. Not the hospital number, a number she didn't recognize with an Ashfield area code. She almost didn't answer. She answered. The voice on the other end was female, young, slightly breathless, and it took her 2 full seconds to place it. The teenage waitress from the Rusty Fork, the one who'd refilled her coffee and asked if she was okay. "Ms. Bennett, I'm sorry to call. I got your number from—" "It doesn't matter. I need to tell you something. About the night at the diner." A pause. Fast breathing underneath it. "There's a video. I didn't know I'd recorded it until this morning. My phone was on the counter, and it was running, and it caught everything, the whole thing, including—" Her voice dropped. "Including Officer Pruitt talking to someone on his radio before he came inside. Before he even walked through the door. He was on his radio saying your name. He knew who you were before he came in. Someone told him you were there." The ER noise continued. Somewhere a monitor beeped its steady patient rhythm. Olivia's hand tightened on the phone. Someone had sent Pruitt to that diner. Someone had known she was there. Someone had known who she was and what she was connected to, and had made a calculation about what a targeted harassment incident might accomplish, or derail, in the middle of a federal investigation that had been quietly running for 6 months. "Don't send that video to anyone yet," she said, her voice exactly level. "Don't post it, don't share it. I'm going to give you a number to call right now. His name is Ehrlich. You call him directly, nobody else." "Okay," the girl said. "Okay, I thought you should know." "You did the right thing," Olivia said. She hung up, looked across the ER at the waiting area where Warren Lyle was still talking to the federal prosecutor, where the agents were still recording, where the slow machinery of accountability was grinding through its early turns. And she thought, Garrett Summer, not Pruitt, not even Lyle. Summer, who had a parallel investigation already running, who had called Lyle at 6:15 in the morning, who had shown up at her hospital in a good suit to contextualize the situation. Summer, who had known her name before she knew his. She pulled up Ehrlich's contact and started walking toward the exit, because what she had to say next was not something she was going to say in the middle of a hospital corridor. She was 4 steps from the door when Priya's voice came over the overhead. "Bennett to Trauma 1. Bennett to Trauma 1. She stopped, turned, went back. Trauma 1 had a man in his 50s who'd been pulled from the Caldwell plant wreckage 40 minutes after the initial blast and had arrived looking more intact than he was. That was the specific danger of blast injuries. The external presentation lied. He was conscious, oriented, answering questions in full sentences, and his pressure was dropping in a way that meant something internal was not. She read the paramedic notes in 8 seconds and went to work. His name was Roy Casper, plant supervisor, and he kept trying to tell her about the secondary gas line that nobody had shut off yet, his words coming in urgent fragments between the assessments she was running. She listened to both things simultaneously, the clinical picture and the information, because both mattered and because compartmentalizing them would have been a waste. "Roy," she said, pressing along his abdomen, watching his face for the specific involuntary response of someone protecting against pain. "Is there someone at the plant who knows which valve shuts the secondary line?" "Gutierrez," he said, "plant safety officer. I don't know if he—" He stopped. His face changed, the change that meant the pain had broken through whatever adrenaline had been managing it. "Stay with me," she said. "Right here." "I'm here," he said, which was the wrong thing to say because it meant he thought he might not be, which meant he was tracking his own decline, which was its own kind of useful information. She called it to Fassbender across the bay. "Probable splenic laceration, possible hepatic involvement. He needs imaging now and surgical on standby." Fassbender appeared, assessed, agreed, and they moved. The next 20 minutes were the particular math of buying time, keeping Roy Casper's blood pressure in a range that didn't indicate immediate collapse, while getting him to imaging and from imaging to the OR before the internal bleeding reached a threshold that imaging would confirm too late to fix. She handed him off outside the OR to the surgical team and stood in the corridor for a moment with the specific empty feeling of having given everything you have to a situation and not yet knowing if it was enough. Then she pulled out her phone and called Ehrlich. "The waitress," she said when he answered. "Her name is Jessa Arlo. She has a video. Pruitt was on his radio saying my name before he walked into the Rusty Fork. He knew I was there. Someone sent him." Silence on Ehrlich's end. Not the silence of surprise. The silence of a person whose existing theory has just received confirmation they were half expecting. "We've been looking at his radio logs," Ehrlich said. "They were partially deleted. The deletion happened at 11:48 p.m., 1 minute after you called the liaison number. Someone was monitoring my contact. We think so, which means someone in or close to this investigation had access to flagged contact protocols, and that's—" He stopped. "Bennett, that's a significant problem. It means Summer's reach is longer than you thought. It means the leak might not be at the local level." His voice had the careful quality of someone choosing words in real time. "We're moving on Summer today, this afternoon. I wanted you to know." "What does moving mean, specifically?" "Arrest. State AG is coordinating with us. The financial records alone are enough, but Lyle's statement this morning, he gave us 4 years of specifics. Names, dates, amounts. Summer was running a protection arrangement. Law enforcement looked the other way on certain business interests in Harlow County in exchange for—" He stopped. "I'll brief you fully when I can, but it's enough. It's more than enough." She leaned against the corridor wall. Around her, the hospital moved in its mid-morning rhythm, slower now than 2 hours ago, the mass casualty surge tapering into the long cleanup of documentation and follow-up that always came after. "The video from Jessa Arlo," she said. "When you get it, the part where he says my name on the radio, that means this wasn't random." "No," Ehrlich said. "It wasn't random." She thought about what that meant to Carrie. The specific weight of learning that a thing you'd experienced as arbitrary was actually targeted. It didn't make it worse exactly. It made it different, more legible, which in some ways was harder. "Okay," she said. "Do what you need to do." She hung up and went back to the floor. The mass casualty documentation took the rest of the morning. 31 patients total from the Caldwell plant incident, 4 critical, 9 serious. The remainder treated and discharged or admitted for observation. Roy Casper made it through the OR and was moved to the ICU before noon. Deputy Harmon, the one from Bay 3, was upgraded to stable by 11 a.m., and his wife arrived at 11:30 and cried in the waiting room in the specific way of someone who had been holding it together for 3 hours and finally stopped. Tobias handled that. He was good with families in waiting rooms. She'd noticed that about him months ago and had never said so directly, which she thought about now and made a note to correct. The board was clearing by 1 p.m. She was charting at the station when Priya set a cup of actual coffee in front of her. Not the burned corridor stuff, real coffee from the break room, which meant someone had made a fresh pot recently, which was so unusual on a day like this that she looked up. "There are people here," Priya said. Her voice was neutral in a way that meant it was deliberately neutral. "In Holt's office. More federal people. And someone from the state AG's office." "Is Holt with them?" "He was. He came out 20 minutes ago and he looked—" Priya considered. "He looked like a man who's been told something he had been hoping not to be told." She drank the coffee. Thought about Gerald Holt, who was not a corrupt man in any meaningful sense. He was an institutional man, which was a different thing. A man who had spent his career learning that the primary function of an administrator was to protect the institution from consequences, and who had made that goal so central that he'd stopped being able to distinguish between protecting Silver Creek and protecting the people inside it. She didn't have contempt for him. She had the specific fatigue of someone who had spent years inside systems run by people like him. She finished the coffee and walked to Holt's office. The door was open. Gerald was behind his desk, and across from him sat a woman Olivia hadn't seen before, late 50s with the compact, authoritative manner of someone who ran things, and beside her, Ehrlich. Ehrlich looked at her when she appeared in the doorway. He didn't signal anything. He didn't need to. "Ms. Bennett," the woman said, "I'm Deputy Attorney General Rosalind Faber. Please come in." She sat. Gerald was looking at a point approximately 8 inches above the surface of his desk. "I'll be brief," Faber said. "The investigation into Dale Pruitt and Warren Lyle has expanded to include Councilman Garrett Summer and 2 additional officials in the Harlow County Administrative Office. We're executing arrest warrants this afternoon." She folded her hands. "As part of that process, we've become aware that certain administrative actions at this hospital in the past 18 hours may have been taken in response to pressure from Summer's network." Gerald's jaw moved. "Mr. Holt," Faber said, turning to him, "I want to give you an opportunity to speak to that before we proceed." The room was quiet. From somewhere down the corridor came the ordinary sounds of the hospital. A cart, a voice, the soft close of a door, and they made Gerald's silence louder by contrast. "I received a call," Gerald said finally. His voice had lost its administrative layer. What was left underneath was just a man who was tired and knew he'd made a wrong turn and was trying to figure out how far back it went. "From Summer's office, yesterday morning, before I contacted our legal team." He stopped. He suggested that if the hospital created distance from Ms. Bennett's situation, there might be certain regulatory considerations that would go smoothly. A pending review of our trauma center certification. "He tied certification review to your response to a federal witness," Faber said. "He implied it," Gerald said. "He didn't say it directly. He's careful." His eyes moved to Olivia briefly, then away. "I should have told you about that call. I should have called the investigators instead of legal. I understand that now." "I need that conversation documented in full," Faber said. "Today." "Yes," Gerald said. "All right." Olivia looked at him. He was not a villain. That was the thing about him. He was just someone who had made the smaller choice every time a smaller choice was available, until the smaller choices had accumulated into something that had a real shape and real consequences. She wasn't going to tell him that right now, but she wasn't going to carry anger about it either. Anger required energy she had other uses for. "Ms. Bennett," Faber said, "I want you to understand that your status as a federal witness is fully intact. Any administrative pressure you received here is now part of the record. And I want to tell you directly." She paused, with the particular deliberateness of someone who chooses their direct statements carefully, "that what you did, starting with that contact call the night of the incident and continuing through this morning, gave us the thread we needed to move on a network we'd been trying to map for 6 months." "I was trying to eat pie," Olivia said. Faber blinked. Then something moved across her face that might have been the precursor to a smile. "I understand. Nevertheless." Garrett Summer was arrested at 3:17 p.m. on a Tuesday in the parking lot of the Harlow County Municipal Building, where he had apparently been attempting to access his office to remove documents that were already in federal custody. Olivia wasn't there. She heard about it from Ehrlich, who called at 3:40, and the detail she remembered afterward was not the arrest itself, but the specific mundane fact that Summer had been carrying a dry cleaning ticket when they took him in. 3 suits. Nobody was going to pick them up. Dale Pruitt had been formally charged that morning. Obstruction, civil rights violations, abuse of authority. The union rep had gone quiet in the way that union reps go quiet when the evidence has reached a weight that makes noise counterproductive. Warren Lyle had been charged separately, his cooperation noted in the filing in language that was accurate and did not constitute a promise. The video from Jessa Arlo, the waitress, the phone left running on the counter, the audio that caught Pruitt on his radio saying Olivia's name 11 minutes before he walked through the rusty fork door, had been formally entered into evidence by 2 p.m. The radio log reconstruction, built from the fragments that hadn't been deleted in time, confirmed the call had come from a number linked to an aide in Summers' office. The aide, whose name was Marcus Teal, was 26 years old and had been working for Summer for 14 months. He was the 4th arrest of the afternoon. He was also, according to Ehrlich, the person who had been monitoring flagged federal contact protocols, not through any sophisticated infiltration, but through a county IT contractor who had access to system logs and had been selling information to Summers' network for 2 years. The contractor was the 5th arrest. By 5 p.m., the local news had the basic outline and was running with it in the specific, excited, breathless way of local news when something actually happens in its territory. And by 6 p.m., the regional affiliates had picked it up. And by 7, the footage of Summers' parking lot arrest was on 3 different platforms and climbing. Olivia watched approximately 40 seconds of it on her phone in the break room, then put her phone away and ate a granola bar she found in her locker that was 6 weeks past its best-by date, but structurally intact. She was pulling on her jacket to leave. 9 p.m., 14-hour day, the granola bar, and half a cup of cold coffee constituting her nutritional intake, when Tobias caught her in the corridor. "Hey," he said, "you okay?" She thought about it for a second, which was more thought than she usually gave that question. "Yeah," she said, "I think so. Tired." That was... He gestured vaguely, a gesture that encompassed the day. That was a lot. The plant thing alone would have been a lot, and then all the other stuff on top of it. "You did well today," she said. "The family's in the waiting room. You're good at that." He looked slightly startled, which confirmed that she hadn't been saying it enough. He was 24, 2 years into the job, still in the phase where he was learning what kind of nurse he was going to be, and what he was going to be was good. "Thanks," he said, and seemed genuinely unsure what to do with the information. She left him there and walked out through the ambulance bay, which smelled like disinfectant and the faint metallic residue of a busy day, and into the parking lot where the night air had the particular mid-autumn quality of cold that means it. She sat in her car for a moment without starting it. The day had a shape now that she could look at from a slight distance. 31 plant workers. Roy Casper in the ICU. Deputy Harmon upgraded to stable. Warren Lyle talking to federal prosecutors in a conference room somewhere in the county building. Garrett Summer in custody. Pruitt charged. Teal charged. The contractor charged. Holt writing a documented account of a phone call he should have reported 18 hours ago. All of it from a piece of pecan pie at 11:30 at night. She knew that wasn't quite right. The state AG's investigation had been running 6 months. Ehrlich's team had been building towards something. The structure existed before she walked into it, but she had handed them the incident that made the structure visible and actionable. She had made a phone call in the middle of a parking lot while a man held her arm too tight, and that had mattered. She had also, between 9 p.m. and the following 9 p.m., kept a plant supervisor's blood pressure stable long enough to get him to surgery, cleared a deputy's collapsed lung with a chest tube, and managed a 31-patient mass casualty surge with 4 nurses and a physician who arrived 12 minutes late. She was not, she told herself, going to make that mean more than it meant. She was tired and her back hurt, and she wanted a shower and sleep, in that order. She started the car. Her phone rang before she'd put it in gear. Ehrlich. She answered on the car speaker. "We have a problem," he said, and his voice had a quality she hadn't heard from him before. Not urgency exactly, something underneath urgency. Summers' attorney made a filing at 6 p.m. We just got it. What kind of filing? A motion to exclude your testimony and the Arlo video on grounds that the initial contact protocol you activated was that your federal consultant status was improperly maintained. He's arguing you didn't qualify for active status at the time of the incident, which would affect witness protections and the admissibility of... He stopped. It's a reach. It's a significant reach. But it's going to a judge tomorrow morning, and if it gets any traction, it could... Hold on, she said. My status. The federal consultant status that was assigned to me through the DoD initiative. Yes. Who processed that status renewal? A pause. Why? Because 6 months ago I got a notification that my file was being reviewed for renewal. Standard process. I filled out the forms, submitted them, heard nothing back. I assumed it had gone through. It had gone through, Ehrlich said. Your status is current. That's not in question. Then what is Summers' attorney arguing? He's arguing that the DoD liaison office that assigned you the status had a procedural gap in its renewal documentation, a signature that was missed in a batch processing error. He's not arguing your status is false. He's arguing there's a paperwork defect that makes the status technically unverifiable as of the night of the incident. She sat in the parking lot with the engine running and thought about that. A signature, she said. In a batch process from 4 months ago, one of 47 renewals in the same batch, he found it because... Ehrlich stopped, and the pause was the specific pause of someone about to say something that indicates the problem is larger than described. Because someone gave it to him. Someone inside the DoD liaison office gave his attorney a copy of the error log. She let that settle. Someone inside the liaison office. The office she'd called the night of the incident. The office whose contact protocol had apparently been monitored by a county IT contractor who sold information to Summers' network. They were looking for a way to make me inadmissible, she said. Not a question. Preemptively. Before the arrest. They found the paperwork defect and sat on it, waiting to see if the arrest happened. When it did, they filed. His voice was controlled and professional, and she could hear underneath it the particular strain of a person who is angry and managing it. Bennett, I want to be straight with you. This is solvable. The signature can be supplied retroactively with documentation of the processing error, and the judge is going to see this for what it is. But it's going to create a 24 to 72-hour window where the admissibility is in question, and during that window, Summers' attorney is going to argue to reduce bail and contest the evidentiary basis for the arrest, she said. Yes. She thought about the woman who had held her sleeping toddler in the family waiting area and said, "He told me you were nothing." She thought about Vera Dunmore, who had stood on a highway shoulder for 11 minutes while a man ran her plates and looked at her a certain way. She thought about the specific tired math that people did when they decided that something was just true and immovable, and there was no particular point. "What do you need from me?" she said. "Tomorrow morning. The hearing is at 9 a.m. I need you there. Not to testify, just to be present, because your physical presence with your current documented credentials is itself part of the evidentiary picture the judge is going to consider." He paused. "And I need you to bring any personal documentation you have related to the DoD initiative. Correspondence, project reports, anything that establishes the ongoing nature of your consultancy independent of the batch processing error." She thought about what she had at the apartment, the emails, the project briefs, the after-action reports from the trauma training program that she'd been submitting quarterly for 8 months. "I have documentation," she said. "I'll bring it." "Good." Another pause. "One more thing. Summers' attorney filed a secondary motion, a request that the court compel disclosure of any communications between you and federal investigators that occurred at Silver Creek Medical Center on hospital time, on grounds that the hospital, He's trying to get Holt's deposition," she said. "He's trying to get Holt's deposition in a way that gives him access to the hospital's internal communications about how they responded to the investigation, which would tell him what we have from that angle before the trial." Gerald Holt's conversation in his office, the documented phone call from Summers' office about the certification review, all of it suddenly of interest to the man who'd made the call. "Gerald Holt needs a lawyer," she said. "Not the hospital's lawyer, his own." He got one this afternoon, Ehrlich said. Faber's office recommended someone. He's already been advised not to respond to any discovery requests from Summers' team without independent counsel present. Okay? She put the car in reverse, then stopped. Ehrlich, the insider at the liaison office, the person who gave Summers' attorney the error log. We're working on it. The person knew I activated the protocol the night of the incident. If they were monitoring contact logs, they would have known within minutes. Yes. Which means Summer knew I'd called in before Pruitt had finished walking me outside. She thought about the timeline. Pruitt deactivating his body camera at 11:31. The call to the liaison line. The radio transmission Pruitt made saying her name. He made a decision in real time. He knew who I was connected to, and he sent Pruitt in anyway. We think, Ehrlich said carefully, that the original intent may have been to manufacture an incident that discredited you before you could be called as a witness in the AG investigation. If Pruitt had managed to arrest you, on whatever pretextual charge he could build, it would have created a narrative. She sat with that. The whole shape of it, visible now from the outside, was different from what she'd experienced from inside it. She had been in a diner eating pie. She had made a phone call. She had stood in a parking lot while a man squeezed her arm and tried to look like the person in control of the situation. From the outside, a targeted operation, premeditated, running on information that had been purchased and positioned and sat on for the right moment. She had walked into it carrying nothing but a 16-hour shift and a working knowledge of when someone was using authority they didn't legitimately have. Tomorrow morning, she said. 9 a.m. I'll be there. She drove home. The night was quiet in a way that felt provisional, the specific quiet of something that hasn't finished yet, not the quiet of something resolved. She showered, ate actual food, sat at her kitchen table with her laptop and pulled up every document she had related to the DoD initiative. Quarterly reports, project correspondence, meeting notes from the trauma training sessions she'd led for the combined civilian-military team in the spring. Emails with timestamps and federal letterhead and her own name on the sender line, establishing without ambiguity that she had been an active, functioning, demonstrably working federal consultant for the duration of the period in question. She organized them, saved them to a drive, printed the most critical ones on her small home printer that ran out of ink halfway through and required the specific intervention of holding the cartridge sideways and shaking it until it produced another 40 pages. It was not a heroic process. Her kitchen table had a coffee ring on it. The printer made an unhappy sound every third page. She was in sweatpants and her feet were cold because she hadn't put on socks. She finished at midnight and sat back and looked at the stack of paper. 47 pages of the most boring documentation imaginable, quarterly metrics, training attendance logs, after-action reports from sessions that involved mannequins and blood pressure cuffs and lengthy debates about triage protocols, that collectively constituted an unambiguous record of exactly who she was and what she'd been doing for the past 8 months. She thought about Summers' attorney finding a single missed signature in a batch of 47 renewals and thinking he'd found a door. She put the papers in a folder and went to bed. At 2:14 a.m., her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She almost didn't check it. She checked it. You should know your friend Holt gave them everything. Full deposition, every call, every meeting, every name. They're going to come after you for what you knew and when. Get a lawyer before morning. She read it twice. Then she screenshot it and sent it to Ehrlich with the message. Someone just tried to spook me into getting independent counsel instead of showing up tomorrow. Unknown number. Thought you should have it. His reply came back in 4 minutes, which meant he was either awake or slept with his phone in his hand. Got it. This is Summers' team. Don't respond. See you at 9. She put the phone down and lay in the dark and thought about the specific mechanics of what the text was trying to do. Not threaten her, not intimidate her in the way Pruitt had tried intimidation, but introduce doubt. Make her uncertain about her allies. Make her spend the night calculating who was trustworthy and who wasn't, expending cognitive energy on a problem that didn't actually exist, arriving at 9 a.m. frayed and off balance and without the folder of documentation she'd spent 2 hours assembling. It was, she thought, the move of someone who had run out of better options and was reaching for whatever was left. She closed her eyes. She was almost asleep when something snagged at the edge of her attention. She lay still, not opening her eyes, letting it surface. The text had said, "Your friend Holt." Ehrlich had told her that Holt got an independent lawyer on Faber's recommendation and had been advised not to respond to Summers' discovery requests. The text was implying Holt had given a full deposition to Summers' team, which contradicted everything Ehrlich had told her, which meant either Ehrlich was wrong or the text was lying, or there was a third possibility she hadn't. She opened her eyes. Holt had given a deposition today, to Faber's office. The text had stripped the qualifier, gave them everything. It hadn't said gave Summers' team everything. It had just said them. And the implication, the nudge, was that Holt had talked to the wrong side. But if you read it without the implication, what it actually said was that Holt had given a full deposition, which he had, to the federal prosecutors. Someone on Summers' team had access to enough information to know that Holt had given a deposition, but they'd framed it to make it sound like betrayal rather than cooperation, which meant they were watching Holt, or someone near Holt, in the hospital. She sat up and sent Ehrlich another message. Someone in or near Silver Creek is feeding information to Summers' team. Holt's deposition details were in that text. That's not public information. She waited. 3 minutes? 5. At the 7-minute mark, his reply came back, and it was 3 words. "We know who." And then, "Don't come in through the main entrance tomorrow. I'll text you an alternate." She sat in the dark with her phone in her hand, and the particular feeling of a situation that had been clarifying for 2 days and had just clarified one more time in a direction she hadn't expected. Someone inside Silver Creek Medical Center had been feeding information to the network for long enough to know about Holt's deposition within hours. The network that had run in Ashfield for 3 years, minimum. The network that had purchased access to federal contact logs and radio channels and certification review processes. 3 years meant before she'd arrived, before she'd taken the nursing position at Silver Creek, before the DoD initiative, before the trauma training program, before any of it. She thought about Gerald Holt and his potted plants and his photograph of Ashfield from the air and his phone call from Summers' office about the certification review and the specific look on his face when she told him to get his own lawyer. She thought about who else had been in his office, who else had heard those conversations. She thought about Patricia Wynn from the hospital legal office, who had arrived with Reese and gone straight to Olivia about communications with outside agencies. How fast that had happened. Who would have called them? She thought, who benefits from a trauma nurse with a federal profile being discredited? And then, following that, who in that hospital has been in position long enough to have built a relationship with Summers' network over 3 years? She had a name forming in her head, an uncomfortable one. Someone she had worked alongside, had trusted in the functional way you trust colleagues because trust is an operational necessity and you can't run an ER any other way. She would not send Ehrlich a guess. She would bring the folder and she would walk in through whatever entrance he designated, and she would sit in a courtroom at 9 a.m. and be the thing she had always been, present, documented, and harder to dismiss than anyone had initially calculated. But the name was there, and it wasn't going away. The name she didn't send to Ehrlich that night was Donald Reese. She lay in the dark and ran it backward and forward the way you work a splinter, not forcing it, just applying steady pressure until the shape became clear. Reese, who had arrived with Patricia Wynn from the hospital legal office within hours of the incident. Reese, who hadn't looked up from his tablet during that entire conversation, which she had read at the time as dismissiveness, but which now read differently. He had been recording, not note-taking, recording, with the particular stillness of someone who knows the device is doing the work. Reese, who had been Silver Creek's outside legal counsel for 4 years according to the staff directory she'd looked at 3 months ago when she needed to route a liability question. 4 years. Overlapping almost exactly with the period Ehrlich's team estimated Summers' network had been operational. She didn't have evidence. She had a shape. There was a difference, and she knew it. And she was not going to send Ehrlich a shape at 2 in the morning and call it information. But she also knew that shapes, in her experience, tended to fill in. She slept 4 hours. Not well, but enough. Ehrlich's alternate entrance was a loading dock on the building's east side, accessed through a service corridor that smelled like floor wax, and the particular institutional air of a building that had been filtering the same oxygen for 40 years. He was waiting there with a woman she hadn't met, young, sharp-eyed, carrying a laptop bag, who turned out to be the junior prosecutor assigned to the admissibility hearing. Her name was Dara Nkosi, and she had the specific energy of someone who had been awake since 4 a.m. and was running on preparation rather than sleep, which Olivia recognized as a sustainable condition. "The judge is Marilyn Feld," Nkosi said as they walked. "She's been on the bench 11 years. She does not like procedural games, and she's already read the filing, so she knows what this is." "What is it, officially?" "Officially, it's a motion to exclude testimony and evidence on grounds of improper federal status documentation." Nkosi's voice was dry. "Unofficially, it's a delay tactic by a defense attorney who found a paperwork error and is hoping the judge can't see the difference between a technical defect and actual fraud." "Can she?" Nkosi looked at her sideways. 11 years on the bench. She can see it from a parking lot. The hearing room was smaller than she'd expected. Not a full courtroom, a procedural room with a high ceiling and fluorescent lights, and the particular furniture of a place where administrative decisions got made with minimal ceremony. Summer was there, which she had known he would be, sitting between two attorneys with the composed look of a man who had been composed for so long it had become structural. He looked at her when she came in. She looked back at him with the same neutral assessment she'd given Pruitt in the diner, the same weather-reading quality, and then she sat down and opened her folder. Summer's lead attorney was a man named Clifford Brack, silver-haired and precise, with the specific confidence of someone who has won on technicalities before and has developed an affection for them. He laid out the argument in 12 minutes, clean and careful. A procedural defect in the renewal batch, a missing signature, a technically unverifiable federal status as of the night in question, and therefore a witness whose protections and the evidence generated under those protections were legally questionable. Judge Feld listened without expression. She was in her 60s, with reading glasses on a chain, and the particular stillness of someone who has heard most arguments in most forms and has learned to wait for the part that actually matters. Nkosi stood. "Your Honor, the defect in question is a single missing countersignature in a batch processing error affecting 47 renewals, all of which have since been corrected. The error is documented, the correction is documented, and Ms. Bennett's active status as a federal consultant has been continuously valid and exercised throughout the relevant period." She placed 3 documents on the court's table. "I'd like to enter her project correspondence, quarterly reports, and after-action submissions, all time-stamped, all bearing federal letterhead, all demonstrating ongoing active consultancy work during the precise period Mr. Brock claims her status was unverifiable." Brock was on his feet. "Your Honor, the question isn't whether she was performing work. It's whether the formal documentation—" "Mr. Brock," Judge Feld said, and her voice was the voice of someone who has made her assessment and is now asking a single clarifying question before she closes the file. "Are you arguing that a woman who submitted federal after-action reports under her federal consultant designation 2 weeks before the incident in question was not, in any operative sense, a federal consultant?" A silence. "The paperwork defect is a paperwork defect," the judge said. "Motion denied." It was not dramatic. It was 11 words delivered in a tone that could have been describing weather, and it was over. Brock sat down. Summer's composed look did not change, but something in the arrangement of his face shifted, fractionally, the way a structure shifts before the shift becomes visible. Outside the hearing room, in the corridor, Nkosi exhaled. "That's it?" Olivia said. "That's the first one," Nkosi said. "The criminal proceedings are separate. This was just the admissibility question." She looked at her laptop. "But without this, Brack's entire pretrial strategy falls apart. He was going to use this to contest the Arlo video, your testimony, Lyle's corroborating statements, all of it built on the premise that the initial incident was generated by an improperly protected witness. And now Summer goes to trial with the full evidentiary record intact." She closed the laptop bag. "He's going to plead. His attorney will advise it. The alternative is a trial where Lyle testifies, Vera Dunmore testifies, you testify, Jessa Arlo's video plays in open court, and the financial records from the AG's 6-month investigation get entered into evidence in their entirety. She paused. Brack is good. He's not that good. Olivia looked down the corridor. Through the window at the end, the morning was fully established, gray and cold, and the specific ordinary quality of a day that doesn't look like anything in particular from outside. What about the insider at Silver Creek, she said. The person feeding information to Summer's team. And Cozy's expression confirmed she knew something. That's an active part of the investigation. I can't give you details. Is it Reese? A pause that was exactly 1 beat longer than a flat denial would have taken. I can't confirm. It's Reese, Olivia said. And Cozy looked at her. Go back to your hospital, she said. We'll be in touch. Donald Reese was arrested on a Thursday, 8 days after the hearing, on charges of obstruction of justice, unauthorized disclosure of federal investigative information, and conspiracy. The arrest happened at his office in the county building, not at Silver Creek, which meant most of the hospital staff heard about it through their phones rather than watching it happen. Olivia heard about it from Tobias, who appeared in the corridor outside the nurse's station with his phone in his hand, wearing an expression that combined vindication and discomfort in the specific ratio of someone who had liked a person before finding out who they were. Reese, he said, I thought he was... I know, she said. He used to bring coffee to the staff meetings. Tobias looked at his phone. That's such a weird thing to know about someone. People who do bad things also bring coffee to meetings, she said. That's one of the more inconvenient facts about people. She went back to her charts. There were patients. Patricia Wynn, who had arrived with Reese that first afternoon and had been operating in good faith throughout, following the direction of outside counsel she had no reason to distrust, cooperated fully with investigators and wasn't charged. She sent Olivia a short email that was professional in tone and personal in a way that sat just under the surface. I should have asked more questions before I came to speak with you. I'm sorry I didn't. Olivia read it twice and replied, Thank you for saying so. That was sufficient. Gerald Holt did not lose his position, though for 3 weeks it seemed like he might. The hospital board reviewed his conduct and concluded, with the specific, careful language of institutions protecting themselves while technically holding someone accountable, that his response had been misguided but not corrupt, and that his full cooperation with federal prosecutors demonstrated an understanding of his obligations that had arrived late, but arrived. He was required to complete ethics training. He was required to implement a formal protocol for responding to situations involving federal investigations. He was, in the particular vocabulary of institutional consequence, counseled. He appeared in Olivia's office doorway one morning, about 2 weeks after it was over. She had an office now, a small one, more closet than office, but with a window, because when they'd offered it, she had said yes, specifically because of the window, and stood there with the look of a man who has composed something and is deciding whether to deliver it. I should have called the investigators instead of legal, he said. Yes, she said. I was trying to protect the hospital. I know you were. That's not... He stopped. That's not actually an excuse, is it? No, she said. But it's an explanation, and those aren't the same thing. She looked at him. You cooperated when it mattered. That's what the record shows. He nodded once, in the particular way of someone accepting something that doesn't fully settle. He left. She went back to work. The plea agreements came in over 6 weeks, staggered, each one landing in the news cycle with its own specific weight. Dale Pruitt pleaded guilty to civil rights violations under color of law and obstruction of justice. His sentencing guidelines called for federal prison time, and the judge, who had read the full evidentiary record, including the Arlo video and the reconstructed radio log, gave him 38 months and a lifetime ban from law enforcement employment at any level in any jurisdiction. His union rep issued a statement that said the department took this seriously. The statement was 4 sentences long. Warren Lyle, whose cooperation had been documented and whose testimony had been central to the prosecution's case, received a reduced sentence, 18 months, supervised release, permanent revocation of his law enforcement certification. He gave a formal statement at sentencing that was not a performance of remorse so much as an accounting, methodical and specific, of decisions he'd made and the reasons he'd told himself they were acceptable. The judge noted that the honesty of the accounting was the most useful thing he'd contributed. Marcus Teal, the aide who had made the call to Pruitt, was 26 years old and had been inside the network without fully understanding its scope, which his attorney argued successfully as mitigation. He received probation and community service and the specific burden of having his professional life permanently defined by a choice he'd made at 25. Olivia didn't know how to feel about that one. She sat with it and decided she didn't need to feel any particular way about it. It wasn't her sentence to deliver. Donald Reese pleaded guilty to all charges after Brack, who had been his attorney until Brack correctly identified a conflict of interest and withdrew, was replaced by a public defender who reviewed the evidence and told him directly that a trial was not a viable strategy. He received 4 years. He had, according to the sentencing documentation, been compensating Summers Network in exchange for referrals that had generated approximately $340,000 in legal fees over 3 years. He had fed information when asked. He had answered his phone. Garrett Summer did not plead for 11 weeks. His team filed 4 more procedural motions, all denied. He gave 2 interviews to sympathetic local journalists in which he described himself as a community servant targeted by federal overreach, and both interviews were subsequently contrasted by reporters with the financial records from the AG investigation in ways that made them read as self-parody rather than defense. His final attorney, Brack having long since declined to return his calls, negotiated a plea that landed him at 7 years federal, forfeiture of all assets acquired through the protection arrangement, permanent removal from public office, and a civil judgment in favor of the individuals documented as victims of the misconduct his network had enabled. 7 years. Olivia heard it from Ehrlich, who called on a Wednesday afternoon while she was eating lunch at her desk and said it the way he said most things, factually, without performance. 7 years, she said. Minimum. He'll serve at least 5 with good behavior, and the asset forfeiture is substantial. The civil judgment is going to follow him regardless of when he gets out. She ate a bite of her sandwich. Is it enough? Ehrlich was quiet for a moment. She'd noticed he didn't treat that question as rhetorical. For the people who didn't report because they calculated it wasn't worth it, probably not. For the ones who did report, Dunmore, Arlo, the others, I think it's something they can hold. Whether it's enough is a question I don't think has a fixed answer. No, she said, it doesn't. You did something real here, Bennett. I want you to know that from someone who's been watching these things for a long time. He paused. It doesn't always go this way. I know, she said. Get some sleep, he said, and hung up. The formal clearance of all accusations against Olivia, which had technically been informal accusations, suspicions, the kind of targeting that operates through implication rather than documentation, came in the form of a letter from the federal prosecutor's office and a separate communication from the DoD liaison confirming her status, her record, and the department's appreciation for her cooperation. The letters were professional and thorough, and she read them once and put them in a drawer. What mattered more practically was what happened at Silver Creek. The hospital board, responding to both the federal outcome and the considerable public attention that had followed it, undertook a formal review of its administrative and legal practices. The review was conducted by an outside firm that had no prior relationship with Silver Creek, which was itself a change from how these things had historically been handled. One of its recommendations was the creation of a Director of Trauma Services position, a dedicated clinical leadership role with administrative authority over both emergency trauma operations and the hospital's participation in external training programs, including the DoD initiative that had been quietly running through the nursing staff for 8 months. They offered it to Olivia on a Tuesday morning in a conference room, with the board chair and the interim chief medical officer and Gerald Holt sitting in a row on one side of the table with the particular posture of people who have prepared what they're going to say. She had not prepared anything. She sat across from them and listened to the offer, which was thorough and included salary figures she hadn't expected and a reporting structure that gave her actual authority rather than the consultative but not really empowered position she'd watched others occupy. When they finished, she asked 3 questions. What was the budget for the trauma training expansion? Whether the DoD initiative partnership would be formalized in the hospital's operating agreement, and whether she would have independent hiring authority for her team. The answers were yes, yes, and yes, with board approval for senior positions. She thought about it for approximately 4 seconds, which was longer than the board chair seemed to expect. "All right," she said. "Yes." She went back to the Rusty Fork on a Friday night in December, 3 months after the night that had started everything. Not with any particular intention. She was tired and the diner was close and she wanted pie, the same reason as before. The teenage waitress, Jessa Arlo, was still working there. She was 20, Olivia had learned, taking classes at the community college in the mornings and working evenings. She'd given her video to the investigators without significant hesitation, once Olivia had told her who to call, which was the kind of thing that looked like courage from the outside, and from the inside probably just felt like doing the obvious next thing. Jessa saw her come in and did the particular thing of not making a big deal of it while also very clearly registering it. She brought the coffee before Olivia asked and stood at the edge of the booth with her order pad. "Pecan?" she said. "Pecan," Olivia confirmed. Jessa wrote it down, didn't leave immediately. "I heard you got the director job," she said. "Yes." "That's good." She tapped the order pad once with her pen. "I've been thinking about nursing school." Olivia looked at her. Jessa was looking somewhere in the middle distance, the way people look when they're saying something they haven't fully decided to say yet. "Community college has a pre-nursing track," Olivia said. "I've been talking to them about a partnership with our training program." Jessa looked at her. "Like a real program?" "Like a real program." She meant it. The conversation with the community college was already in its second meeting. "If you're serious, come talk to me. The hospital has some scholarship resources that don't get used because people don't know to ask." Jessa stood there for a second with the particular expression of someone reassessing the dimensions of a room she thought she knew. Then she nodded once, wrote something in the corner of her order pad that was probably a note to herself, and went to get the pie. The diner was warm and the coffee was the particular slightly too strong quality of diner coffee, and outside the window Ashfield looked the same as it always had. The gas station sign, the traffic light on Route 9, the hardware store and the pharmacy in their nighttime versions. Ordinary. Unremarkable. But Vera Dunmore had given a formal statement to federal investigators, and her account had been entered into the record in 2 separate proceedings. 4 of the 5 people convicted had faced documented consequences specifically because she'd talked to Ehrlich for 40 minutes on a phone call she almost hadn't taken, and Jessa Arlo was thinking about nursing school. These things were connected to a night that had started as an accident, wrong place, right timing, a phone contact that Olivia had pressed without knowing it would become the thread that unraveled something large. You couldn't plan for that kind of thing. You couldn't engineer it. What you could do was be the kind of person who pressed the contact instead of absorbing it quietly, who passed the name to the investigator instead of keeping the calculation to herself, who came back to the same diner and ordered the same pie instead of changing her route because something bad had happened there once. She knew who she was. She had always known, mostly. But the past 3 months had clarified it in the way that only pressure clarifies things. Not by adding anything new, but by stripping off the residue of other people's assessments, until what was left was just the actual shape of the thing. She had been called nothing by a man who needed her to be nothing because otherwise his authority required justification. She had been managed and redirected and legally maneuvered and targeted through channels she hadn't fully understood until they became visible. She had walked into a federal hearing room with 47 pages of boring documentation and sat in a chair and been exactly what she was. That was all. That was the whole thing. It wasn't a story about one remarkable person. It was a story about what happens when someone who has been told they don't matter decides, at a specific moment in a specific parking lot, that the calculation is wrong, and then tells the truth to the people who can use it, and then shows up the next day and does their job. The pie came. She ate it. Jessa refilled the coffee without being asked, which was a good instinct in a person considering a career in care. Olivia noted it. Months later, when the Regional Emergency Medicine Association gave her their annual leadership recognition, a small glass award that she would lose in a movie 2 years from now and never fully locate, she stood at a podium in a conference room in front of 60 people and said approximately 4 minutes worth of things that were true. She said that courage was not the absence of fear or hesitation. It was the decision to do the next right thing while those feelings were present and accounted for. She said that systems changed not because they wanted to, but because someone inside them kept accurate records and refused to adjust their account of events to fit what was convenient. She said that the most dangerous thing you could do to a person who underestimated you was show up. She did not say that she had been afraid. In the specific way she'd been afraid the night she stood in that parking lot with a man's hand on her arm and the deactivated body camera and the weight of a targeted situation she was only beginning to understand. She didn't say it because it wasn't relevant to the people in the room, and because she had processed it in other contexts, and because some things were private, not because they were shameful, but because they belonged to her. She sat down. Tobias, who was in the third row because she'd made sure he had a seat, caught her eye and gave her the small nod she had given the trucker at the Rusty Fork counter, which was the universal language of "I see it." She returned it. Afterward, standing in the parking lot with her coat on and the award in a paper bag because she'd neglected to bring anything to carry it in, she called her sister. "I saw the news thing," her sister said. "From last month. You could have called me." "I know. I'm calling you now." "That's not the same thing and you know it." "Yes," she said. "I know." She looked at the parking lot, at the ordinary evening quality of it. "I'm okay. I wanted to tell you directly." Her sister was quiet for a moment. "Are you actually okay, or are you doing the thing where you say you're okay, because telling me anything else requires more conversation than you want to have right now?" She thought about it. "Somewhere in between," she said, "but closer to actually okay than I've been in a while." "All right," her sister said. "That's something." "It is," Olivia said. She stood in the parking lot a little longer after the call ended. The air was cold and clear, and she could see 3 stars through the gap in the cloud cover, which in a town with this much light pollution was more than usual. She didn't make anything of it. It was just weather. It was just the sky doing what the sky did, indifferent and accurate and present whether you were looking at it or not. She had a staff meeting at 7:30 tomorrow morning. She had a curriculum review for the DoD partnership at 10. She had a conversation with the community college contact at 2 about the pre-nursing track and the scholarship resources, and what a real pipeline between the 2 institutions might actually look like if someone built it properly. She had a lot of work to do. She got in her car and went home.